The day everything changed started like any normal morning for people all around the world. Some were on their way to work, some were opening shops, some were preparing breakfast for their families, and some were simply trying to get a few more minutes of sleep. Nobody knew that within a few minutes, life on Earth would shift into something nobody had ever imagined. It began with a strange sound in the sky. At first, most people thought it was just another airplane, or maybe thunder from a distant storm. But the sound kept growing louder and sharper, like metal scraping against the wind. People stepped out of their houses, looked out through windows, or paused their work to look up. What they saw didn't look like anything human-built. Huge shapes entered the atmosphere, slowly, silently, almost gracefully. They were not shaped like rockets or planes. They were smooth, silver-like objects, floating with quiet confidence. Some were the size of buildings. Others were even larger. Within minutes, these mysterious ships positioned themselves over different countries, hovering above cities and oceans, creating massive shadows that stretched across neighborhoods. Fear hit people immediately. Some froze, unable to understand what they were seeing. Others ran indoors. Cars stopped in the middle of roads. Schools began calling parents to pick up their children. News channels switched to emergency broadcasts, but even the reporters sounded confused. Nobody had an answer. Nobody knew if these objects were peaceful or dangerous. All they knew was that Earth was no longer alone, and then something happened that changed the entire world in a single moment. A pulse, a deep, silent wave spread from the ships. It didn't make a sound, but people felt it pass through their bodies like a brief shiver. Every phone died. Every light flickered out. Internet connections disappeared. Airplanes drifting through the sky lost communication. The whole world went into a sudden, eerie silence. It was as if someone had pressed a giant pause button on Earth. For a few minutes, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The uncertainty was so heavy that people felt it in their breath. Many tried switching on their phones again, tapping screens over and over, hoping they would light up. But nothing worked. Across the world, governments scrambled to understand what had happened. Military bases switched to backup systems. Emergency teams were activated. Leaders from different countries tried to contact one another. Through whatever old-fashioned communication methods, they still had in the middle of all this chaos. A global defense organization called the Emergency Earth Council gathered inside a secured underground facility. It was built for situations exactly like this, situations nobody ever wanted to see in real life. The room was filled with experts, officers, scientists, and analysts whose faces showed more questions than answers. At the center of the room stood a senior general, known for staying calm, even when everything around him seemed to fall apart. He had seen many crises in his life, but nothing came close to this. He looked at the giant screens on the walls, showing live aerial footage of the silver ships hovering in different parts of the world. He took a deep breath, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "What do we know so far?" he asked. One of the analysts explained that the pulse from the ships had disrupted global communication systems. It wasn't a weapon, at least not one that caused physical harm. It felt more like a large-scale shutdown, almost as if the ships wanted Earth to stop speaking for a moment. That confused everyone even more. If the visitors wanted to destroy Earth, they could have fired actual weapons. But they didn't. Another expert pointed out that the ships were not attacking anything. They were simply hovering, observing, waiting. This made the general think. If they weren't here to attack, then what did they want? Why appear suddenly, without warning, without any sign of communication? Meanwhile, outside in the streets of different nations, life had turned into a strange mix of panic and curiosity. People gathered in open areas, looking up at the sky with fear-filled eyes. Some stayed close to their families, clutching their hands tightly. Some recorded the silent ships with cameras that still worked offline. Some whispered prayers. Others blamed governments, thinking the world should have been prepared for something like this. But the truth was simple. No one was prepared. Hours passed. The ships did not move. They simply stayed in their positions, as if waiting for something. The general continued studying every possible detail. He listened to reports from pilots, scientists, and observers. He asked for data from satellites unaffected by the pulse. He analyzed recordings of the ships entering Earth's atmosphere. The more he learned, the more it became clear that this was not a random invasion. There was intention behind everything. A plan. Slowly, patterns began to appear. Different ships hovered over places connected to history, science, and natural energy sources. One hovered over a massive desert, another above a deep ocean trench, another over a mountain range, and several over major cities. It almost looked like they were searching for something. This thought worried the general even more. If they were searching, then they would eventually try to find whatever they were looking for. And that could put people in danger. The Emergency Earth Council held another meeting, and this time every member of the room sensed the growing seriousness in the general's voice. He explained that early reports from intelligence teams suggested the visitors had not destroyed a single structure. No attacks, no confrontations, no demands. But their technology was advanced enough to control communication across the entire planet in seconds. This meant Earth was at a major disadvantage. A scientist pointed out something else. Each ship emitted a very low sound, almost like a heartbeat. When studied closely, this sound had repeating patterns, almost like signals. They weren't simple noises. They were structured, like language. But nobody understood them yet. The general instructed the team to break down and decode every pattern. If the visitors were trying to communicate, then maybe humanity could respond. But understanding their signals would take time. And time felt shorter with every passing minute. Late in the evening, as the world sat under the silent silver giants, something unexpected happened. A small beam of light shot from one of the ships, landing gently on an empty field on the outskirts of a quiet town. It didn't burn the ground or scare anyone nearby. Instead, it formed a glowing symbol, a strange shape that nobody had seen before. Within minutes, drones, scientists, and officers arrived to examine it. Even the general watched remotely through a screen. The glowing symbol pulsed lightly, as if sending a message through light instead of sound. A young analyst studying the footage gasped softly. She pointed out that the symbol matched patterns seen in old ancient carvings from remote parts of the world. Carvings that scholars believed were thousands of years old. This raised more questions than answers. Had these visitors been here before? If yes, then why return now? And why in such an overwhelming way? The general felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. He knew the world was looking to him and the council for guidance. People were scared. Families were worried. Even governments were unsure of their next steps. But the general had a thought that he did not voice aloud yet. If the visitors had really been to Earth centuries ago, perhaps they believed something belonged to them here. Something they had lost. Something they intended to retrieve. He needed more evidence before saying it out loud. Night slowly spread across different countries, but nobody slept. Windows stayed open, lights remained off, and people kept watching the sky. The ships glowed faintly, like giant silent guardians of the night. Some children asked their parents if the visitors were friendly. Parents had no answers, only gentle reassurances. Inside the council room, the general looked at the map of the world, marked with dots showing the locations of the ships. He could feel the story forming in front of him, but the ending was unclear. What he knew for certain was this: the arrival was no mistake. It was not random. And it was not just the beginning of a visit. Something was coming next. Something bigger. Earth had been invaded, but not in the way people usually imagined. No explosions. No destruction. No open threats. Just presence. Silent, powerful. Intentional presence. And that alone was enough to shake humanity to its core. The general stood up from his chair, walked toward the large screen displaying the hovering ships, and whispered to himself, though the room was empty enough that his voice echoed softly, "We need to understand them before they make their next move." The world stayed awake that night, holding its breath under the watch of strangers from the sky. Nobody knew whether the next day would bring answers, danger, or something entirely unexpected. All they knew was that Earth was no longer the same place it had been just a few hours earlier. New chapter of human history had begun, and it started with silence, shadows, and ships that watched the world without blinking. The day after the ships arrived, the world was still in shock. People had stayed awake through the night, watching the silver giants in the sky, waiting for any sign of movement. Now, sunlight spilled across the cities and fields, but the morning felt strange, almost unreal. Life had not returned to normal, and nobody knew if it ever would. Governments were struggling to regain control. Meetings ran all day, with officials arguing over the best way to respond. Some believed the visitors were hostile. Others thought they were explorers or researchers. Every suggestion seemed too small to match the scale of the threat or the mystery. The general, however, stayed calm. He knew that fear would spread faster than the truth. He also knew that humanity could not fight what it did not understand. His plan was simple but difficult. Gather information first, act second. In different countries, scientists and analysts worked day and night. They examined images from satellites, footage from the ships, and recordings of the strange pulses. Each signal was studied again and again, every detail dissected for a clue. The more they learned, the clearer it became. These ships were intelligent, controlled, and deliberate. Every movement had a purpose. A young analyst working on the signal patterns discovered something unexpected. Hidden in the pulses were repeating sequences that resembled a form of language. It was not like any human language, but it followed strict patterns, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. She spent hours decoding it, writing notes on a pad while her eyes strained from the blue light of the monitors. Every time she thought she had understood a part, another part appeared that contradicted her conclusions. Meanwhile, in cities under the ships, people struggled to carry on with daily life. Schools were closed, transportation was disrupted, and businesses operated at half their capacity. Parents tried to keep children calm, but the questions were constant. Why are they here? Are we in danger? Will they leave us alone? Even adults struggled to answer these questions, because no one truly knew. The general held regular briefings with the Emergency Earth Council. He made sure that all countries were included in discussions, sharing information about the ships, the signals, and the strange light patterns. He emphasized caution. "We cannot assume they are hostile," he said, "but we also cannot assume they are harmless. Observation is our first weapon." Some council members grew frustrated. They wanted action, airstrikes, warnings, defense measures, but the general refused to act without understanding. He knew that one wrong move could trigger a disaster. If they can disrupt communication worldwide, imagine what else they are capable of. He warned. As days passed, small discoveries began to emerge. Archaeologists and historians found that symbols appearing in the ship's light pulses matched carvings from ancient ruins. These symbols were scattered across the world, in places considered sacred or mysterious. Some had been documented in remote caves, others in temples long forgotten. Nobody knew who had made them or why. A theory began to form. Perhaps these visitors were not just exploring Earth, they were searching for something humans had overlooked for centuries. If this was true, It explained why the ships moved deliberately, hovering over certain locations. They were not random. They were on a mission. This thought worried the general. He understood that if the visitors were searching, the world had to be protected. It was not about fighting. It was about safeguarding humanity while still learning the truth. The young analyst, still working on the language patterns, discovered something astonishing. The signals hinted at memory, almost as if the visitors remembered something from the past. Her hands trembled slightly as she shared the findings with the general. "They remember," she said softly. "They remember Earth, or at least something from it." The general nodded. He had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed made the situation even more delicate. If the visitors had been here before, they might have believed something on Earth belonged to them. And if that were the case, misunderstanding could escalate into conflict. Outside, people continued to watch the sky. Some reported seeing small beams of light touching the ground, like the ships were scanning specific areas. In one remote desert, a glowing light moved across a rock formation, revealing patterns that glimmered in the sun. Scientists rushed to examine the site, discovering that these patterns were similar to those the analyst had been studying in the signal pulses. Every discovery made people more curious and more fearful. News channels broadcast theories and speculations, some credible, some wildly imaginative. Social media exploded with debates and panic. People shared videos, photographs, and guesses, trying to understand what was happening. But amidst the noise, the general and his council worked quietly, steadily, trying to piece together the truth. One morning, a team of drones captured something unusual. A ship hovered above a remote forest, and a beam of light gently touched the ground. In that spot, a small object appeared round, metallic, and faintly glowing. The general studied the footage with the council. "They are collecting things," he said. "They are not just observing, they are taking pieces of something." This was a turning point. Humanity realized that the visitors were not destructive, but their presence was not harmless either. Every movement could alter the environment. Every beam could remove something from the Earth. It became clear that the next steps had to be careful and deliberate. Scientists and engineers began working together to track the objects collected by the visitors. They mapped each location, noting the timing, the sequence, and the possible purpose. The work was exhausting, but it gave humanity hope. If they could understand the pattern, perhaps they could predict the visitors' next move. Meanwhile, across the world, life continued in strange new ways. Markets reopened under strict surveillance. Streets were patrolled by local authorities, and schools held classes indoors while teachers monitored the sky. Families adapted, sharing stories and supporting each other. Fear remained, but so did resilience. Humans had survived crises before, and though this was unlike anything they had faced, instinctively they found ways to cope. The general encouraged this human resilience. He made statements to the public, reminding people to stay calm and rational. "We do not yet know why they are here," he said in a broadcast. "But we will learn. We will observe. And we will respond intelligently, together." His calm voice reassured millions, giving them a sense of direction in the midst of confusion. The young analyst continued her work late into the night. Patterns of the visitors' signals began to form a map of locations, ancient symbols, and timelines. Slowly, she and her team realized that the visitors' mission was connected to Earth's history long before humans could even record it. They were not here by chance. Something from the past had brought them back. This revelation changed the Council's approach. No longer was the focus only on defense. Now it included research, preservation, and understanding. Teams were sent to the sites where the visitors had scanned or collected objects, documenting every detail, ensuring nothing was lost. The mission was no longer about survival alone. It was about protecting knowledge, history, and the very planet itself. Even as scientists worked, the general planned for possible confrontation. Communication efforts continued, with messages sent in patterns the visitors might understand. Careful, respectful attempts were made to show humanity's intentions without provoking fear or aggression. Every action was calculated, every movement deliberate. People around the world felt the tension of living under the watch of silent ships. Fear persisted, but so did hope. Children drew pictures of the ships in the sky, adults wrote messages of peace, and communities held small gatherings to discuss what the future might bring. It was strange, living under such uncertainty, yet life moved forward. The general reviewed the maps and reports late one night. He could see the connections forming, the symbols, the locations, the patterns of movement. Slowly, he began to understand what the visitors were looking for. He realized that humanity could help, if approached carefully. But first, the truth had to be uncovered. He turned to the young analyst. "We must know what they are searching for," he said, "and we must be ready to guide them safely if we can. But above all, we must protect the Earth and its people." As the night sky darkened, the ships remained in place, almost motionless, silently watching and waiting. Humanity watched back, studying every movement, recording every signal, and learning to be patient. Fear was still present, but determination was stronger. People realized that facing the unknown required more than weapons. It required intelligence, courage, and unity. By the end of the second day, the world had changed completely. Humanity had not yet confronted the visitors directly, but it had begun to understand them. People were no longer just afraid. They were curious, cautious, and alert. And the general knew that understanding this mission, this search, would determine whether the next step would lead to disaster or cooperation. For the first time since the ships arrived, the general allowed himself a thought that was almost hopeful. Perhaps the visitors were not here to destroy, but to recover something important. And if that was true, there might still be a way to communicate, to negotiate, and to prevent conflict before it even began. But for now, humanity waited, studied, and prepared. The days after the arrival of the ships felt longer than usual. Time seemed to stretch as humanity adjusted to the new reality. People woke up each morning to see the silver giants still hovering in the sky, silent but impossible to ignore. Attacks had happened, but the presence of the ships made every ordinary activity feel strange and fragile. Children were curious but cautious. Adults were anxious yet determined. And through it all, the general continued guiding the world with calm focus. By now, patterns were becoming clearer. The visitors were not moving randomly. They were hovering over ancient sites, remote mountains, deserts, and underwater locations. They were searching, collecting, and scanning. Scientists were piecing together fragments of their mission, using satellites, drones, and even old historical records. Slowly, an astonishing possibility emerged. The visitors had been here long ago, perhaps thousands of years before, and something humans had forgotten was what they were now trying to recover. Historians and archaeologists were brought together like never before. Ancient carvings, symbols, and ruins that were long considered mysterious suddenly became important clues. Some carvings depicted strange shapes in the sky. Others showed objects that looked metallic and advanced. Scholars compared these patterns with the signals from the ships. It became clear that the visitors were responding to these markers almost as if they were following a trail left by time itself. The general called a meeting with the council. Experts, analysts, and leaders from all over the world joined through secure channels. The atmosphere was tense, but focused. The general spoke. Calmly, his voice steady even as the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone. "We are beginning to understand their purpose," he said. "They are not attacking us. They are searching. They are collecting. And we must be ready to guide them safely without creating conflict. But first, we must know what they are looking for. One scientist presented a map of all the locations the ships had visited. Each location corresponded to an ancient site, a monument, or a natural landmark with unusual geological features. The team noticed that some of these locations were so remote that humans rarely went there. It was as if the visitors had knowledge of Earth that even modern humans had lost. A young analyst working on the alien signals discovered that the patterns were changing slightly each day. The ships were not static in thought or purpose. They were learning, adapting, and responding to Earth's environment. The analyst realized that these visitors were intelligent and capable of reasoning. This meant any attempt to communicate had to be precise and careful. A mistake could be misinterpreted. Meanwhile, in the cities, life had adapted to the unusual reality of hovering ships. People spoke about the silver giants as if they were neighbors who had moved in without warning. Some were terrified, some fascinated, and some simply watched quietly, unsure what to feel. Streets became calmer, as if people were unconsciously adjusting their movements under the silent watch of the sky. Communities formed small groups to discuss events and share observations. Fear was still there, but so was cooperation. In one remote desert, a team of scientists had been sent to examine a site where the visitors had landed a light beam. They discovered that the ground was slightly altered, almost as if some material had been removed or rearranged. It was not harmful, but it was deliberate. They documented every detail, taking photographs, samples, and measurements. The general watched the updates closely. "This is not random collection," he said. "They are looking for something specific, something important, and we must understand it before it is too late." The council debated whether to send people closer to the ships. Some argued that approaching them could provoke hostility. Others believed that observing from a distance would not be enough to understand their mission. The general decided on a cautious approach. Small, controlled teams would monitor the ships closely, documenting every movement, while remaining at a safe distance. At night, the silver giants glowed faintly against the sky. People across the world stared at them, noticing small pulses of light coming from each ship. Some lights moved across landscapes, tracing paths like invisible hands. A young child pointed to the sky and asked her parents, "Are they drawing something?" The parents could only smile nervously, unsure what to say. As the days passed, the analyst and her team discovered that some signals seemed to interact with Earth's natural features. The ships were not just observing human activity, they were sensing energy, patterns, and locations connected to the planet itself. One signal corresponded with a mountain range that produced unusual magnetic readings. Another matched an underground cavern with a rare mineral. Slowly, it became clear that the visitors were seeking a network of locations that were connected in ways humans had forgotten. The general realized that this mission was bigger than any one country or person. It was a mission that involved the whole planet. Humanity needed to work together, not just to survive, but to understand. He arranged a series of global briefings, ensuring that every country, large or small, had access to the latest findings. Transparency, he believed, would prevent panic and encourage cooperation. As weeks passed, small discoveries continued. In a dense forest, researchers found carvings on ancient trees, long preserved and covered in moss, that matched the patterns from the ships. In a desert valley, a stone formation aligned perfectly with one of the pulses of light. Each discovery added to the growing understanding that the visitors were not destroying Earth. They were piecing together fragments of a larger picture, but questions remained. Why had they come now? Why had they returned after so many centuries? And what would happen once they found what they were looking for? These questions weighed heavily on the general and his team. They knew that without answers, humanity remained vulnerable. One night, the general received a report that changed everything. A drone had captured a moment when the light from a ship seemed to reveal a hidden object beneath the sand in a remote desert. The object glowed faintly, pulsing in response to the ship. Scientists analyzed the footage and discovered that the object resembled an ancient artifact described in texts from multiple cultures around the world. Different societies had recorded similar items, calling them by different names, but the descriptions matched. The general understood immediately. The visitors were not here to harm humanity. They were here to recover something they believed belonged to them, but their methods were unintentional hazards. Without knowing their intent, humans might react in ways that could escalate into conflict. The young analyst looked at the footage and said, "It's like they are remembering history. They are following a trail from long ago, something humans barely understand. They think it belongs to them, and that is why they are here." The general nodded. "Exactly. And that is why we need to protect both Earth and the artifact. We must guide them carefully and prevent misunderstandings. If we fail, even unintentionally, the consequences could be disastrous." Across the world, people began noticing small changes in the behavior of the ships. They were no longer stationary. They moved slowly, carefully, as if following a path. Each movement seemed calculated, almost respectful of the landscapes they passed over. Humanity began to understand that the visitors had rules, limits, and intentions. They were not wild or chaotic. They had purpose and memory. In cities, streets, and towns, people started sharing observations. Communities recorded patterns, wrote notes, and sent videos to researchers. Even ordinary citizens became part of the understanding process, contributing to the collection of knowledge. Humanity was adapting, learning to live with these silent visitors while trying to uncover their purpose. The general realized that this process of learning was just as important as any physical defense. Understanding the visitors, their signals, and their artifacts was the only way to protect the planet without triggering a conflict. He made plans to coordinate scientists, historians, and engineers, forming teams that could work across borders, combining skills to decode the visitor's purpose. Meanwhile, children continued to ask questions, their innocent curiosity reminding adults of what was at stake. Why are they here? One child asked while looking at the sky, "What do they want?" A teacher answered simply, "They are searching for something important. We need to watch carefully and learn from them." The child nodded, satisfied, though still fascinated by the glowing ships above. As the sun set on the third week since the arrival, the general looked out of the window of the council facility. The ships reflected the fading light, silver and quiet. Humanity had not yet confronted them, but it was learning. People were observing, documenting, and slowly piecing together the story. The visitors were not enemies, but they were not entirely understood either. The general knew that the next steps would be critical. Humanity could no longer wait. They had to guide the visitors carefully, protect the artifacts, and prepare for any possibility. But above all, they had to stay calm, intelligent, and united. The night ended with quiet determination. Across the world, people watched the silver giants, aware that history was being written in the sky above. Humanity had begun to understand that survival was not just about defending against threats. It was about learning, cooperating, and facing the unknown with courage. As the days passed, the world began noticing something unusual about the movements of the silver ships. They no longer hovered in one place all the time. Instead, they began to move slowly, almost carefully, from one location to another. The movement was deliberate, measured as if they were following a path invisible to human eyes. People across the world watched from windows, rooftops, and open fields. Children pointed excitedly. Adults whispered in awe, and everyone felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. In the council facility, the general studied the movements closely. Reports were coming in from satellites, drones, and ground observers. Each movement seemed to have a pattern, and each pattern seemed to correspond with ancient sites and unusual natural formations. A team of scientists worked tirelessly to map these movements, connecting them with historic records, folklore, and geological surveys. Slowly, it became clear that the visitors were searching for something specific, something humans might not even fully understand. In one remote mountain range, a ship hovered low over a steep cliff. Its silver surface reflected the sunlight, and a thin beam of light stretched from the bottom of the ship down to the rocks. The beam didn't burn or destroy anything, but it illuminated carvings on the cliff face, ancient symbols that had been weathered over centuries. Archaeologists rushed to the site, carefully documenting every detail. They discovered patterns that matched other sites around the world, forming a network of locations that the visitors seemed to be connecting. The general called a meeting with the council. Everyone knew that the next steps would be critical. Any misstep could cause panic, and even a minor misunderstanding could escalate into something dangerous. They are collecting information and materials, the general explained. They are not attacking, but their actions could still be harmful if we don't guide them carefully. We need to understand their goal before the situation escalates. One analyst pointed out that the ship's beams of light seemed to follow certain rules. They avoided harming living creatures and moved in ways that respected natural formations. It was almost as if the visitors had a code set of rules they were following strictly. The general realized that this code was the key to understanding their intentions. Teams were sent to observe the ships from a safe distance. Scientists, engineers, and historians worked together, documenting every detail of the light patterns, the objects being scanned, and the movements of the ships. Each observation added to the growing understanding of the visitors' purpose. Slowly, a picture began to form. The visitors were repairing something. They were not building weapons or causing destruction. They were restoring, reconstructing, and connecting pieces that had been scattered across the planet. In one valley, a particularly large ship hovered above a series of stone formations. The formations had been partially buried over centuries, but the ship's light revealed their original shapes. Scientists were amazed to find that the formations aligned perfectly with other locations hundreds of miles away. The general realized that the visitors were using the planet itself as a guide, following paths that humans had forgotten over time. Meanwhile, in cities and towns, people were learning to live with the presence of the ships. Life had changed, but humanity adapted. Markets operated under careful observation. Schools held lessons indoors, while teachers watched the skies, and communities shared information about what they saw. People were cautious but resilient, finding ways to continue their daily lives. Even under the silent silver watchers above. At night, the ships glowed softly against the dark sky. Their lights pulsed slowly, illuminating the landscapes below. Families gathered near windows and on rooftops to watch. Some whispered theories, others simply marveled in silence. Children drew pictures of the ships, imagining stories of friendly visitors and magical discoveries. Even as fear lingered, wonder began to replace it. Humanity realized that these visitors were not mindless invaders. They were intelligent, deliberate, and purposeful. The general studied the patterns and signals closely. He realized that understanding the visitors' code was essential. If humans could interpret their rules, they could guide the visitors safely and avoid accidental conflict. He instructed analysts to focus on the movements, the light patterns, and the responses to environmental features. Every detail mattered. In one desert, a beam of light revealed an object partially buried under sand. Scientists rushed to the site and discovered a metallic artifact, small but intricate, with markings that matched symbols found in ancient texts around the world. The general studied the findings carefully. This confirmed his suspicion. The visitors were collecting fragments of something larger, something that had been scattered across Earth long ago. The council debated the next steps. Some argued for cautious observation from a distance. Others suggested sending a direct communication attempt. The general decided on a middle path. Teams would continue monitoring the ships closely, while experts worked on creating messages in patterns that the visitors might understand. The goal was to show peaceful intentions without provoking fear or hostility. Meanwhile, across the world, people noticed small changes in the behavior of the ships. They were moving more precisely, almost as if they were following instructions or responding to unseen signals. Some light beams followed the paths of rivers, others traced lines along mountain ridges, and some hovered over sites with significant historical or cultural importance. Humanity began to understand that the visitors were not random in their actions. They had purpose, memory, and intelligence. The young analyst working on the signals discovered something remarkable. The patterns seemed to interact with Earth itself, responding to natural energy sources, geological formations, and even atmospheric conditions. It was as if the visitors were sensing the planet in ways humans could not. Every pulse of light, every movement of a ship, corresponded to a deeper connection with Earth's history and structure. The general realized that humanity's role was to guide and protect. It was not about confrontation or force. It was about understanding, communication, and careful intervention. Any misstep could create fear, and fear could lead to mistakes that neither humans nor visitors wanted. As weeks passed, the council worked tirelessly. Maps were updated constantly, signals were analyzed, and teams were sent to remote locations to document every detail. Humanity's understanding was growing, but the visitors' purpose remained partly mysterious. They were intelligent, careful, and deliberate, but their ultimate goal was still unknown. In one mountain valley, a ship hovered above a stone structure, partially hidden by snow. The light beam revealed symbols carved into the stone, perfectly aligned with other locations on the planet. Historians and archaeologists examined the site, realizing that the visitors were connecting pieces of a larger puzzle. Slowly, humanity began to see the larger picture. The visitors were reconstructing something ancient, something that had been scattered and forgotten over time. People around the world noticed these changes. Fear began to shift into cautious curiosity. Communities organized observation groups. Children drew maps of the ship's movements, and families discussed the discoveries. Humanity was learning not just to survive, but to understand. The general instructed his team to prepare for the possibility of direct contact. Communication attempts were planned carefully, using light patterns, symbols, and signals that might be understood by the visitors. The goal was clear: show peaceful intentions, guide the visitors safely, and protect Earth's people and resources. At night, the silver ships glowed against the dark sky, their movements precise and deliberate. People watched from cities, towns, and remote villages. Children imagined stories of friendship and adventure. Adults whispered theories, and communities shared observations. Humanity was adapting, learning, and slowly building a bridge to the unknown. The general reviewed the maps and signal patterns late into the night. He saw the connections forming, the light beams, the artifacts, the ancient symbols. Slowly, he realized that the visitors' actions were not harmful. They were guided by rules, patterns, and memory. If humanity could interpret these patterns correctly, they could avoid conflict and guide the visitors safely. The night ended with quiet determination. Across the world, people watched the ships, aware that history was unfolding above them. Humanity had begun to understand the visitors' purpose. And with careful observation and guidance, they could protect the planet while learning from the intelligent beings above. The general whispered to himself as he studied the signals. We are close. Soon we will understand them completely. And when we do, we will be ready to guide them safely. The world slept under the silent glow of the ships, aware that the story of Earth was being rewritten. The visitors were no longer just a mystery. They were part of a puzzle that humanity had the chance to solve. And with patience, courage, and careful observation, humans could ensure that the next step would be a step toward understanding, not conflict. By now, humanity had begun to understand more about the visitors. The silver ships moved with purpose, scanning landscapes, uncovering ancient artifacts, and connecting locations that had long been forgotten. People across the world watched with a mixture of fear and curiosity, while scientists, historians, and engineers worked tirelessly to piece together the meaning behind every movement and every pulse of light. The general had called a meeting with the Emergency Earth Council. For weeks they had been observing, analyzing, and trying to interpret the signals. Now it was clear that waiting alone would not be enough. The visitors were intelligent, deliberate, and persistent. They were retrieving something that humans barely understood, but that was extremely important to them. Humanity needed to act carefully, but act it must. The time has come, the general said, looking at the faces around him. They invaded our planet without asking. They are here, collecting and searching, but now humanity comes for answers. We will approach this carefully, but we will approach it directly. We need to understand their purpose, their goal, and what they hope to achieve. A young analyst nodded. We've been decoding their signals for weeks. I believe we can create a message they might understand. Something simple, peaceful, and clear. It won't be conversation in words, but it might show them our intentions. The council agreed. The plan was delicate. Teams would attempt to communicate using light patterns that mimicked the visitors' own signals. Drones would project the signals at safe distances, following the same rhythm and energy as the ship's pulses. Scientists worked day and night to ensure every detail matched the visitors' patterns. Even the slightest miscalculation could lead to misunderstandings. Meanwhile, across the world, people watched the sky with growing awareness. They had grown used to the silver giants hovering above, moving carefully from one site to another. Children drew pictures, adults speculated about their purpose, and communities shared stories and observations. Humanity had not only survived the shock of invasion, but it had begun to adapt, to learn, and to cooperate. The first attempt at communication was subtle. A series of lights flashed in carefully designed sequences from a remote desert, where one of the ships hovered low above the ground. The pulses matched the rhythm of the ship's own signals, and for several tense moments, nothing happened. Scientists and council members held their breath, hoping the visitors would recognize the gesture. Then, slowly, a response came. The ship's lights brightened and shifted in patterns that mirrored the Earth's signals. It was the first acknowledgement, the first sign that the visitors had noticed humanity and might be willing to interact. Cheers quietly broke out in the council room, but the general remained calm. This is just the first step, he reminded everyone. We cannot assume understanding yet. We proceed carefully. Over the next few days, the communication continued. The ships responded to every signal, and humans adjusted their patterns to match. It became a strange and delicate conversation, conducted entirely through pulses of light. Scientists studied every shift and change, analyzing the sequence and speed of each response. Slowly, the council began to understand that the visitors were intelligent, capable of reasoning, and likely motivated by something deeply important. The general realized that a direct approach was necessary. It was no longer enough to communicate through signals alone. Humanity needed to understand what the visitors were searching for and if possible, guide them without creating danger. A plan was drafted for a carefully controlled, non-threatening approach to the nearest ship. Drones would accompany the effort, and sensors would record everything. Communication patterns would continue during the approach, keeping the visitors aware that humans meant no harm. When the day came, a hush fell over the world. Across continents, people watched as the drones approached the hovering ship. The general and his team monitored every movement, every pulse of light, every shift in energy. For hours, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly, a section of the ship opened, revealing a faint glow inside. It was the first visible sign of an interior, of life beyond the silver surface. The general leaned over the control panel, studying the readings. "They are observing us," he said, "but they are not hostile. Stay calm, stay focused, and continue the signals." Inside the ship, the light pulses became more complex. Scientists on Earth recognized patterns that suggested understanding, reasoning, and even curiosity. The visitors were examining the signals, responding to them, and possibly trying to interpret humanity's intentions. After careful observation, the general decided it was time for the next step. Using a combination of drones, light pulses, and carefully coordinated movements, the council guided the visitors to a location where humans could safely observe and interact. It was a remote valley, far from cities, with wide open spaces and minimal risk to people or property. As the ships descended into position, humanity held its collective breath. The general addressed the council quietly. "We have reached the moment of truth. They will see us, and we will see them. But we remain calm. Peaceful observation first. Understanding before action. We must not provoke fear." From the drone's footage, it was clear that the visitors were cautious as well. Their movements slowed. Their lights pulsed more rhythmically, almost in acknowledgement. They hovered just above the ground, and for a few tense minutes, there was nothing but silence. Then, something extraordinary happened. A small object appeared, lowered by one of the ships onto the ground. It glowed softly and seemed to pulse with energy. Scientists recognized it immediately. It was one of the artifacts the visitors had been collecting. It matched descriptions found in ancient texts from multiple cultures. It was small, intricate, and clearly important to the visitors. The general studied the object closely. "They are not here to destroy us," he said quietly. "They are here to recover what they believe belongs to them. But we must ensure that both humanity and the artifact remain safe. This is our responsibility." The council worked quickly to document the artifact, photographing it, scanning it, and analyzing every detail. At the same time, the light signals continued, creating a conversation between humans and visitors. Slowly, a level of mutual understanding began to form. The visitors responded to human gestures, and humans learned to interpret the subtle shifts in the light. The general realized that communication alone would not be enough. He needed to be ready for any possibility, including the chance that the visitors might not fully understand human intentions. Emergency protocols were in place, but they remained in the background. The focus was on trust, patience, and careful observation. As the sun set over the valley, the visitors' lights pulsed one final time, almost as if acknowledging that the humans had approached correctly. Humanity had not only survived the initial invasion, but had reached the first stage of understanding. For the first time, there was hope that the visitors and humans could coexist peacefully, at least temporarily. In cities around the world, people watched the lights flicker in the distance. News channels reported on the cautious success, emphasizing that humanity had made its first peaceful contact. Children pointed at the sky, imagining friends from beyond, while adults whispered cautiously, wondering what might come next. The general looked at the council, his expression calm but determined. "We are close," he said. "We understand more than ever. But our work is just beginning. We must continue to guide them carefully, protect the planet, and ensure that both humans and visitors leave this encounter unharmed. This is the moment. Humanity proves that intelligence, patience, and courage can overcome fear of the unknown. As night fell, the silver ships remained in the valley, their lights softly glowing against the darkness. Humanity had taken the first step toward understanding, and though the future remained uncertain, there was now hope. Hope that the visitors were not enemies, hope that dialogue was possible, and hope that the mistakes of fear and misunderstanding could be avoided. The general stayed up late, reviewing maps, signals, and footage. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, "They came without asking, but now we have come for understanding. And if we remain calm, patient, and careful, we can ensure that the next step will bring knowledge, not conflict." Across the world, people slept under the gentle glow of the ships, aware that the story of Earth had entered a new chapter. Humanity had faced the unknown and had taken the first steps toward bridging the gap between worlds. And though the road ahead was uncertain, there was a sense of shared purpose to protect the planet, understand the visitors, and build a future where curiosity and courage could guide the way. The night ended with quiet determination. The general, the council, and the people of Earth knew that challenges would come, but they also knew that intelligence, patience, and humanity could shape the outcome. The visitors had arrived, humanity had responded, and now both sides were watching, learning, and preparing for what would come next. The following morning felt unlike any other in human history. The world had already adapted to the presence of the silver ships hovering above, but today there was a new energy in the air, a mixture of hope, curiosity, and cautious determination. Humanity had made contact, however indirect, and the general knew that this day could change everything. The council met early, reviewing every signal from the previous night. The lights of the ships had responded with more complexity than ever before, as if acknowledging that humans had learned something new. Analysts had tracked the patterns and compared them with historical data and the artifacts collected. Slowly, the message became clear. The visitors were not here to harm humanity. They were reclaiming pieces of a larger puzzle that had been scattered across Earth centuries ago. The general addressed the council. "We now understand that their purpose is specific. They seek knowledge and objects connected to their past. Our role is to ensure that this search does not endanger anyone. On Earth, we guide them, we observe, and we respond carefully. This is the moment where humanity must show intelligence, patience, and courage." Teams of scientists, historians, and engineers were dispatched to key locations where the visitors had landed or scanned. They documented every artifact, every symbol, and every pulse of light, creating a detailed record. People across the world were instructed to stay calm, observe, and report any unusual activity. Humanity was participating in a collective effort to understand, rather than panic, and it was working. In one remote desert, the visitor's ship lowered another artifact onto the ground, glowing softly. It was different from the others, larger, more intricate, and clearly important. Scientists approached cautiously, examining it from a distance, while the general monitored the process closely. Every move was deliberate, ensuring no mistake could cause alarm or provoke a reaction from the visitors. For hours, the communication continued through light patterns. Humans mimicked the visitors' signals, sending messages of peace and cooperation. The ships responded, mirroring the patterns, and even adjusting their positions to create symmetrical movements. It was a silent conversation, but one full of meaning. Slowly, both sides were learning to understand each other. As the day progressed, the general noticed something remarkable. One of the ships hovered over a large stone formation in a remote valley, its lights pulsing in a complex sequence. Then, slowly, the ship moved its beam over the formation, revealing carvings that had been hidden for centuries. Archaeologists immediately recognized the carvings as part of a global pattern. The visitors were reconstructing knowledge, and humanity had the chance to witness it firsthand. Across the world, people watched through news broadcasts, social media, and personal recordings. Children drew pictures of the glowing ships and their artifacts, while adults discussed the patterns and the meaning behind the visitors' actions. The fear that had gripped the world since the arrival of the ships was slowly being replaced by understanding, curiosity, and a cautious optimism. The general and his team realized that this was a critical moment. Humanity had a choice: to act with fear or to act with intelligence and patience. They chose the latter. Using carefully calibrated signals, they guided the ships to a central location where multiple artifacts could be studied together. Scientists examined the objects without touching them directly, using sensors and scanners to understand their composition, origin, and purpose. The young analyst who had first discovered the patterns in the visitors' signals was at the center of this effort. She monitored the sequences of light pulses, adjusting human signals in real time. Slowly, a deeper understanding emerged. The visitors were not only retrieving objects, they were also trying to connect them, forming a network that had been broken long ago. Humanity was witnessing a process that had started long before humans could record history, a process that the visitors considered essential. As night fell, the ship's lights grew brighter, illuminating the valley like a silent festival of knowledge. Families gathered at safe distances, watching the glowing silver giants with a mixture of awe and wonder. For the first time, humans felt a sense of cooperation with these visitors. The ships were no longer invaders, they were partners in a shared understanding of the world's history. The general addressed the council quietly. They are not enemies. They are intelligent, deliberate, and purposeful. Humanity has the opportunity to guide them safely, to learn from them, and to ensure that this process does not harm our planet or our people. We must continue with patience, observation, and care. In the following hours, the visitors continued their work. Artifacts were gently lifted, scanned, and occasionally repositioned. Light beams traced patterns across the ground, connecting objects, carvings, and natural formations. The visitors' movements were precise, almost ritualistic, showing respect for the planet and its inhabitants. Scientists began to notice a subtle interaction between the visitors' signals and Earth's natural energy. Certain locations resonated with the ship's pulses, and artifacts seemed to respond with faint light or energy emissions. It was clear that the visitors had an advanced understanding of the planet, one that humans were only beginning to grasp. Humanity's patience and careful guidance were paying off. For the first time, there was clear communication, not through words, but through understanding and shared observation. The general realized that this could be the beginning of a new era for Earth, one where humans and visitors coexisted in cautious harmony, learning from each other. Late in the night, the general received reports from a remote location where several artifacts had been positioned in alignment with ancient carvings. The visitors hovered silently, their lights pulsing rhythmically. Then, without warning, a beam of light descended from one of the ships, illuminating all the artifacts simultaneously. Scientists were stunned. The objects emitted a faint glow, as if responding to the visitor's presence. The pulse of energy seemed to resonate with the planet itself, creating a connection that had not existed for centuries. The general watched quietly, understanding that this moment was historic. Humanity had not only survived the arrival of the visitors, but it had also begun to participate in the restoration of knowledge, history, and perhaps even the planet's natural balance. This was more than survival. It was collaboration, understanding, and respect between species. Across the world, people watched in wonder. Children pointed to the sky, imagining stories of friendship and discovery. Adults whispered about the implications of what they were seeing. Humanity had learned that fear was not the only response to the unknown. Intelligence, patience, and cooperation could create understanding, even in the face of beings far more advanced than themselves. By the following morning, the visitors had completed their work in the valley. They moved slowly, carefully, and then lifted away from the ground. Their lights pulsed once, twice, and then faded into the sky. The artifacts had been scanned, recorded, and repositioned, forming connections that humans were only beginning to comprehend. The general addressed the council and the world. The visitors have shown us that their purpose was not destruction. They have retrieved knowledge and objects important to them, and in doing so, they have demonstrated intelligence, respect, and purpose. Humanity has responded with patience, courage, and careful guidance. This is the first step toward understanding, collaboration, and perhaps a future where we learn from each other. For the first time since the arrival of the silver ships, the world felt a sense of relief. The immediate threat had passed, and a new chapter had begun. Humanity had faced the unknown and had acted with intelligence, restraint, and courage. The general knew that challenges might return, but he also knew that humanity had proven it could respond to the unexpected with wisdom and care. Children drew pictures of the glowing ships and the artifacts, creating stories that would be told for generations. Adults discussed patterns, symbols, and possibilities, imagining the connections that had been restored. Communities shared their experiences, recording observations for scientists and historians. Humanity had not only survived, it had participated in something extraordinary. The general stayed up late, reviewing the data and the signals one last time. The ships had left for now, but the artifacts, the carvings, and the connections they had restored remained. Humanity had learned that fear was not the only response to the unknown. Observation, understanding, patience, and cooperation could achieve far more than panic or aggression. He whispered quietly to himself, almost in awe. They came without asking, but we have come together. We have observed, guided, and learned. And in doing so, humanity has shown that intelligence, patience, and courage can shape the outcome of even the most uncertain events. Across the world, people slept under the fading glow of the silver ships. The night was quiet, calm, and filled with a sense of wonder. Humanity had faced the unknown and had not only survived, but had learned, guided, and participated in a process that would be remembered for centuries. The visitors had returned home, carrying with them the knowledge they had recovered, but the impact of their visit remained on Earth. Humanity had grown, adapted, and proved that intelligence, patience, and cooperation could meet the challenges of the unknown. The story of this encounter would be